Hello, family. Enjoy this relaxing moment with Surly Tales. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Julian fumbled with his keys in the dimly lit hallway, fighting off a wave of guilt that washed over him the moment he glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight. On most nights, Mira would still be awake, knitting or reading in their cozy living room. But today wasn't just any day, it was their 7th wedding anniversary, and he had forgotten again. Soft music played from the stereo in the corner, muted enough for him to realize it must have been on for hours. He caught the faint aroma of burnt steak lingering in the air. That's when he noticed the dining table. 2 place settings, candles reduced to sad, dripping wax, and a cold dinner lying untouched. His heart gave a sharp twist. "Mira," he called out, setting his briefcase down. No response. He quietly walked to the bedroom, but she wasn't there. He checked the kitchen, the patio, nothing. Finally, he found her in the study, curled up on the leather armchair, a blanket draped over her shoulders. A thin journal lay on the desk nearby. She stirred. "You're late," she observed, voice flat with disappointment. She didn't need to say more. The uneaten meal said it all. Before he could muster any apology, she got up and brushed past him. "I'm tired," she whispered. "We'll talk in the morning." Julian opened his mouth to say he was sorry, that he'd been swamped at work, that time had slipped away. But the words felt hollow. He watched her retreat to the bedroom, shutting the door softly. The worst part was the absence of anger in her face, only resignation, as though she expected nothing else from him. Left alone, Julian lingered in the study, drawn to the leather journal on the desk. He resisted the urge to open it, though curiosity tugged at him. Instead, he picked up an old photograph from the bookshelf, their wedding day. Mira's eyes sparkled, her smile bright with hope. He remembered that day vividly, how they had danced under fairy lights, whispering promises of a future full of shared moments. Now, he couldn't recall the last time they had dinner together without tension thickening the air. Guilt clenched his chest like a vice. He extinguished the flickering candles in the dining room, noticing how the scent of disappointment mingled with the remains of the cold steak. He forced himself to clean up, each clink of silverware echoing like a reproach. That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Memories of earlier anniversaries flooded his mind. Flowers, special dates, sweet notes. Where had the time gone? How had they drifted so far apart that he could forget one of the most meaningful days of their marriage? He listened for Mira's breathing on the other side of the bed, but she was unnervingly quiet, as though she'd willed herself into stillness. Morning came with a haze of regret. Julian awoke to find Mira gone, probably off to work. On the kitchen counter sat a half-eaten piece of toast. Next to it was a sticky note, "Dinner's in the fridge if you want it. I'll be late tonight." The brevity stung. Before, she would have written a little heart, or maybe a silly doodle. This note felt clinical, forced, like a message from a stranger. He made coffee, his mind drifting to the study and that small leather journal he'd spotted. Mira had never mentioned keeping a diary, but then again, they hadn't shared many personal confessions lately. Somewhere along the line, they had stopped communicating about the little details of their days. The mundane had swallowed them whole. As he sipped his coffee, the previous evening's scene replayed in his head: the neglected meal, Mira's quiet exit, his own failure to show up on time, physically and emotionally. For the first time in months, something within him stirred, an ache or maybe an awakening. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd crossed a dangerous line where Mira was beginning to lose hope in him. At work, he found it impossible to concentrate. His mind wandered to her expression in the study, the lonely flicker of hurt behind her eyes. He wondered what she had written in that journal. The part of him that respected privacy struggled against a growing urge to find out what lay within those pages. What if it held secrets about how she really felt, things she couldn't say out loud? Later that night, he returned to an empty house. The silence was deafening. Once again, he found himself drawn to the study. His heart pounded as he considered the leather journal sitting in the drawer. He'd never read her private thoughts. Yet guilt and curiosity wrestled inside him. He decided to wait. He told himself that if he truly wanted to fix their marriage, he needed to talk to her directly, not violate her trust by delving into her diary. But a small voice in the back of his mind whispered, "She's slipping away. There might be answers in there." He went to bed early, hoping to speak with Mira when she arrived. But she came home past midnight, tiptoeing into the room with the softness of a ghost. By the time he stirred, she was already asleep, breathing shallowly, as if wary of disturbing him. Their 7th anniversary ended with distance between them so vast it felt like they were no longer sharing the same life. And yet, an unspoken tension lingered in the air, charged with the question: was this the point of no return, or was there still hope buried beneath neglect? Julian couldn't find the answer that night. All he knew was that something had broken, and if he didn't act soon, it might be lost forever. Julian trudged into the study the next morning under the pretense of searching for a phone charger. In truth, his heart thrummed with a guilty anticipation. Mira had left early again, leaving the house eerily quiet. He told himself he would just peek around, see if she had stashed any chargers in the desk. Yet his gaze kept sliding toward that narrow drawer, the one that held her leather journal. He hesitated, hand hovering over the handle. The question of whether he had any right to read it weighed on him. But the memory of her pained eyes fueled his desperation. He told himself he only wanted to understand her pain, maybe find a clue on how to fix things. With trembling fingers, he eased the drawer open. There it was, lying beneath a few scattered pens and sticky notes. The journal's worn cover bore the faint impressions of her handwriting. Julian's pulse pounded in his ears as he lifted the book, feeling its weight as if it contained the gravity of her unspoken burdens. He flipped it open, careful not to disturb the pages too much, as though the slightest crease might betray his intrusion. The first entry he read was from months ago, describing a night he had come home late after a work dinner. She had written about the meal she'd prepared, how her excitement had turned to quiet disappointment. "He didn't even notice that I cut my hair today," one line read. "I feel so unseen. I can't remember the last time he asked how I'm doing." Julian's stomach twisted. Had he truly been so blind? Page after page revealed small heartbreaks he hadn't realized he was causing. She wrote about waiting up for him, planning little surprises, and getting no acknowledgement in return. He scanned entries from birthdays, random Tuesdays, nights she spent alone in a crowded bed of worries. One paragraph left him breathless. "Sometimes I think he only stays because he's used to me. Love feels like a distant memory. I'm losing hope that we can ever be what we were." He pressed his hand against his mouth, fighting the shame. It was like seeing a relationship autopsy, each sentence dissecting their marriage. He wanted to stop reading, but something compelled him to turn the page. That was when he found a line that made his heart pound in a different way. "There's someone else who listens. I feel safe with him. He knows things about me even Julian never asked." Julian froze. The words jumped off the page, stinging like an accusation. Another man? The notion left him dizzy. Had he driven her to confide in someone else? He frantically searched the next lines, but the entry ended abruptly. He flipped through subsequent pages, finding references to secret conversations, the comfort she found with him, her relief at being heard. He slammed the journal shut, a surge of jealousy and fear igniting inside him. Who was this man? His mind raced with possibilities. A coworker? A neighbor? Someone she'd met online? The shock mixed with an odd sense of betrayal. He felt hypocritical, reading her private confessions without permission, yet seething at the idea of her confiding in another person. He placed the journal back in the drawer, trying to calm himself. Then he heard the front door open. Panicked, he quickly pushed the drawer shut and ducked out of the study, forcing a casual expression onto his face. Mira called out from the hallway, "Julian? I forgot my wallet." Her tone was polite but distant, the tension between them a constant hum. He emerged from the study, heart still hammering. "It's on the kitchen counter," he said, pointing. "You heading to work early again?" She nodded, walking briskly. "I have a big meeting and some errands afterward." He noticed the circles under her eyes. She looked like she hadn't slept well in weeks. A pang of guilt tugged at him, but before he could speak, she grabbed her wallet and offered a tight smile. "I'll be home late," she murmured. Julian watched her leave. The rush of emotions in his chest was almost too much to process. Regret for neglecting her, anger at the mysterious confidant in her life, and a fierce determination to find out who it was. For a moment, he considered confronting her right away. But he hesitated, worried that if he did, she'd retract even further. Instead, he spent the afternoon lost in thought, replaying every moment he had brushed her off or buried himself in work. Each memory felt like a puzzle piece that now formed the entire picture of her despair. By evening, he found himself pacing the living room, itching with the urge to confront the journal again. But he resisted. He tried calling Mira, intending to invite her for dinner, an attempt to mend the rift. She didn't pick up. He left a voicemail, stumbling through an apology-laced invitation to talk. Long after darkness fell, Julian sat alone in the living room, his phone silent. At midnight, he trudged to bed, past the study that now felt haunted by the words he had read. As he lay down, one question roared in his mind with relentless intensity. Who was this other man, the one who listened, who knew her better than he did? Days turned into a restless blur. Julian functioned on autopilot at work, going through the motions while his thoughts remained fixated on Mira's journal. He replayed every hint he'd caught, the reference to someone else who listens, the heartbreak in her words. Each morning, he woke with a renewed sense of urgency to uncover the truth. One night, while Mira showered, Julian found himself in the study again. The drawer beckoned him like a guilty secret waiting to be uncovered. He pulled it open, hands trembling, eyes flitting to the hallway to ensure Mira was still out of earshot. He turned the pages more carefully this time, scanning for any mention of this mysterious person. Entry after entry described her isolation, her loneliness, the hopelessness that clung to her. Then, finally, near the bottom of a page, he saw a name scrawled hastily, Evan. Julian's pulse thundered. He mouthed the name silently, unable to recall a friend, co-worker, or acquaintance of Mira's by that name. He started flipping through later entries, searching for more mentions, but the name appeared only in brief, cryptic notations. Evan says I should speak my mind. Evan thinks I need to find a safe space to heal. But who was he? A colleague? A lover? Voices from the hallway jolted Julian. He heard the shower shut off. Quickly, he closed the journal, stashing it exactly as he'd found it. He slipped out of the study just in time to see Mira emerging from the bathroom in a towel, steam drifting around her like a veil. She gazed at him curiously. "Were you looking for something?" she asked. He forced a smile. "Just checking if we had any printer paper," he lied, shrugging awkwardly. She didn't press the issue. Instead, she turned to the bedroom, her shoulders slumped. Julian was struck by how thin she looked, how she seemed almost translucent, as if heartbreak had siphoned her vitality. That night, he didn't sleep. The name, Evan, pounded in his head. He imagined scenarios, each one more distressing than the last. What if they were meeting somewhere, sharing intimate moments he was too busy to provide? His stomach twisted. The uneasy mix of guilt and jealousy churned within him. Over the following days, Julian observed Mira with renewed vigilance. Whenever she texted on her phone, he strained to see if Evan would pop up on the screen. She left the house at odd times, citing errands or visits to the gym. He debated whether to follow her, feeling torn between shame and the desperate need to know the truth. One Friday morning, he made a decision. After Mira left, dressed more nicely than usual, he waited 15 minutes before grabbing his jacket and heading to his car. He trailed her at a distance, trying not to arouse suspicion. He felt like a trespasser in his own marriage, yet he couldn't quell the impulse. Mira parked near a quaint coffee shop, one they rarely visited. Through the glass window, Julian saw her approach a table. A man rose to greet her, a man about her age, with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. They hugged briefly, exchanging smiles. She looked relaxed, even radiant, in a way Julian hadn't seen in ages. His heart pounded like a drum in his chest. He stood there, hidden behind a parked car, watching them laugh and lean in closely. They looked comfortable, as if they shared a deep understanding. Rage and fear twisted inside him, forming a knot that made it hard to breathe. He snapped a photo with his phone, though he wasn't sure why. Evidence? Proof for a confrontation? He saw the man place a hand over Mira's for a moment, a gesture that spoke of support or intimacy. Julian wasn't sure which. He fought the urge to storm inside and demand answers, but he held back. Minutes later, Mira and the man stood up. Mira appeared to be wiping tears from her eyes. The man, Evan, Julian presumed, looked concerned, offering her tissues. She nodded, putting them away. Then they walked out together, and Julian ducked behind another car, feeling like a stranger spying on his own wife. He watched them part ways with a somber wave. Mira got back into her vehicle and drove off in the direction of her workplace. Evan disappeared around a corner. Julian stayed there, frozen, phone gripped so tightly his knuckles turned white. That evening, when Mira came home, Julian studied her carefully. He noticed she seemed lighter, as though a burden had been eased. The realization fueled his jealousy. He tried to bring up her day, half hoping she'd mention meeting someone. But she avoided eye contact and gave short answers. He lay awake that night, the image of them in the coffee shop seared into his mind. He wondered if he was witnessing the unraveling of his marriage. The fear was almost worse than anger. For so long he'd taken her for granted, and now he felt powerless, uncertain how to rebuild what he had so carelessly let deteriorate. Outside, the night stretched on, silent as a tomb. Inside Julian's heart, a storm raged. He had a name, a face, and a single nagging question echoing through his thoughts. How could Mira still love him if she found solace in the arms of someone else? In the days following Julian's discovery, his tension with Mira sharpened to a near-breaking point. They navigated the same house like strangers in a narrow corridor, carefully avoiding each other's gazes, sleeping back-to-back at night. Every so often, Julian would watch Mira typing on her phone, smiling faintly at messages he wasn't privy to. Every time, a surge of jealousy knotted his chest. One evening, Julian came home to find her in the kitchen, preparing a simple pasta dish. Steam rose from the pot, filling the air with the aroma of tomatoes and oregano. She looked up, giving him the ghost of a smile. "Dinner will be ready soon," she said softly. He swallowed hard. "Thanks." He lingered, wanting to bridge the gap somehow, but the words refused to form. Instead, he said nothing, heading to the study under the pretense of finishing work. The leather journal was still in the drawer. It called to him with silent reproach. He fought the urge to read more, to confirm his worst fears or find some hope hidden in her words. Instead, he shut the drawer, deciding he couldn't keep invading her privacy. If they were going to heal, they had to do it through honest communication, or so he told himself. But his resolve broke later that night. The tension had grown unbearable. He found Mira's journal on the living room table, likely forgotten after she scribbled something inside. His heart hammered, a war raging in him, to respect her boundaries or to finally confront the truth. In a surge of anguish, he snatched it up and flipped to the most recent entry. He read lines that cut him to the core. "I'm terrified I'll never see the Julian I fell in love with again. Evan says I need to voice my needs, but I'm too afraid of rejection. Sometimes I consider walking away, maybe that would shock Julian enough to remember me." The words blurred as tears stung his eyes. "Mira!" he shouted, unable to contain himself. He hurled the journal onto the coffee table, hearing its spine crack against the wood. She rushed in from the bedroom, alarmed. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. He pointed at the journal, anger and desperation flooding him. "Who is Evan? And what are these entries about leaving me?" She froze, eyes widening with disbelief. "You read my diary?" He raked a hand through his hair, torn between regret and fury. "I did okay? I couldn't just keep pretending everything's fine. You're writing about someone else, about feeling safer with him than you do with me." Mira's lips quivered, her hands gripping the back of a chair for support. "I never wanted to hide anything," she began, but Julian cut her off, voice cracking. "I saw you with him at the coffee shop," he admitted, shame mingling with anger. Laughing, crying, hugging. You looked happier with him than you've been with me in months." A painful silence settled. Mira slowly sank into a chair, blinking back tears. "Evan is my counselor," she said, voice subdued. "I've been going to therapy for weeks. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to think I was weak or pathetic. I was afraid you'd dismiss it or not even notice." Julian's breath caught in his throat. "Your counselor?" He repeated the words, trying to process. "But you wrote about feeling safe with him. About him knowing you better than I do." She lifted a trembling hand to her forehead, tears escaping down her cheeks. "He's someone who actually asks me how I'm doing. Who looks me in the eye and listens. I've tried for so long to talk to you, Julian, but every time, you were too busy or too tired or too distracted. I felt invisible." He stared at the journal, shame gnawing at him. Everything he had assumed, the worst-case scenarios, the suspicions of an affair, came crashing down in the face of her simple truth. She was lonely, and she sought a safe space to breathe. Mira's voice broke the hush. "I wrote about leaving because I felt like I was screaming underwater, and you couldn't hear me. Every day, I was drowning in this marriage, waiting for you to see me." Julian collapsed onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, voice muffled. "I had no idea how deep your pain ran. I got so wrapped up in my own world. I neglected you." She joined him on the sofa, but there was a chasm between them. "Why didn't you ask me about the journal first? Why did you spy on me like that?" she asked, a wounded edge in her tone. He exhaled shakily. "I was afraid to face what I might discover. I thought you were having an affair. That I'd already lost you." Tears welled in her eyes again. "You almost did lose me. I was slipping away more every day." They sat in the thick quiet, the air charged with sorrow and lingering resentment. Julian reached for her hand, and for a moment, she allowed it. Their fingers brushed, the contact fragile. "Where do we go from here?" he asked, voice hoarse. Mira withdrew her hand, staring at the journal on the table. "I don't know," she admitted. "But if we're ever going to repair this, it has to start with honesty and real effort. I can't go on feeling like a ghost in my own home." Julian nodded, tears gathering at the corners of his eyes. He realized that this confrontation wasn't an end, it could be a beginning, if he had the courage to change. The question was whether it would be enough to mend the damage he'd already done. For the next few days, Julian and Mira barely interacted, as if both feared upsetting the fragile silence that settled over their lives. Julian tried to reach out, cooking a meal, asking about her day, but Mira's responses remained guarded. She didn't leave, yet her emotional distance was palpable. One afternoon, Julian found himself alone again in the study. He stared at the leather journal resting on the desk, uncertain whether to open it. Their explosive confrontation still weighed heavily on him, but something else had changed. A flicker of hope that she was willing to speak her pain out loud. The only question was whether she would let him walk alongside her on the path of healing. His gaze fell on a single envelope tucked behind the journal. His name, Julian, was written on it in Mira's slanted script. A thick swirl of dread and curiosity pooled in his gut. She must have left it here intentionally, or perhaps she'd forgotten. Heart pounding, he picked it up, hesitating for a moment before carefully opening the seal. Inside was a folded page, covered in Mira's handwriting. "Julian, if you're reading this, it means you've found the courage to look past your fears. I wrote this letter during one of my lowest points, when I felt more alone than ever. I need you to understand how I got here. I never stopped loving you. That's the hardest part, realizing I still care so deeply for the man you were. But somewhere along the line, you stopped seeing me. I became a piece of furniture, a background figure in your life. I tried to fix it by being patient, by dropping hints, by hoping we could talk. But you were so absorbed in work and in your own head that my needs became invisible. And when I realized you weren't asking me anything about my struggles, I turned to a counselor. I couldn't bear to shoulder the weight alone anymore. I know it looks like I've found another love, but what I really found was empathy. Someone who listened without judgment. Someone who reminded me that my feelings mattered. Still, there's a part of me that believes in us, that hopes we can find our way back. But I can't do it on my own. I'm tired, Julian, tired of talking to walls, tired of tears, tired of feeling half dead in a marriage that once brought me so much joy. If there's a way back to us, I want it. But I can't find the path alone anymore. I need you to meet me halfway, to fight for us, to truly see me. If you're willing to try, I'll be waiting, but I can't promise I'll wait forever. Mira. Julian read the letter twice, tears burning his eyes. Her words cut through him like shards of glass. The shame, the remorse, the longing, they all coalesced into a desperate urge to change. He pressed the letter against his chest, inhaling shaky breaths until the crushing guilt in his lungs eased. Later that night, Mira came home to find Julian in the living room, the letter resting on the coffee table in front of him. She paused, her eyes darting between his face and the envelope. "You read it," she stated. Not a question, just a resigned truth. He nodded, voice tight. "I'm sorry for everything. I know an apology doesn't fix what's broken, but I want to do better. I want to earn your trust again." Her expression revealed a swirl of emotions. Caution, hurt, faint hope. "I don't know if you can," she said, voice trembling. "I meant every word in that letter. I'm at my limit, Julian." He gestured to the couch, inviting her to sit. She hesitated before joining him, carefully leaving a small space between them. "I've been selfish, thinking about my own stress and forgetting to ask how you were coping," he began, words tumbling from his heart. "I see how much you've been hurting, how little I've been there. I know it won't be easy, but I want to try to make it right." Mira ran a hand over her face, sighing. "I don't want just words. I need to see actions, changes in how you live day to day. I need you to be present. And not just for a week. Long term." Julian swallowed the lump in his throat. "I understand." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook. "I bought this for myself. I thought maybe we could write notes to each other. It sounds silly, but you have your journal, and I realized I've never tried to put my feelings into writing. Maybe it's time I learn." Her gaze softened fractionally. "It's not silly," she said quietly. "Writing helped me process what I couldn't say face to face." Emboldened by her response, he handed her the notebook. "I want you to know how committed I am. I'll go to counseling with you, if you'll let me. I'll cut back on my hours at work. I'll do whatever it takes." Tears welled in her eyes, and she blinked them away. "I just don't want to be disappointed again." Her vulnerability shone in the dim light, an echo of the faith she once had in him. Julian placed a trembling hand over hers, feeling the coolness of her skin. "I will spend every day proving that you're not invisible to me," he promised. "I can't erase the past, but I can be better in the present. And that's where we have to start, right?" Mira exhaled a shaky breath, nodding. For the first time in what felt like ages, they shared a moment of quiet connection, an unspoken accord that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way forward. That night, after she'd gone to bed, Julian opened the small notebook for the first time. He wrote, "I see you now. I lost you in the noise. But I want to find you again." He left the notebook on her nightstand, praying she would read it and sense the sincerity in every single word. 3 weeks later, Julian was home earlier than usual. The house was calm, sunlight warming the living room in gentle rays. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. Tonight was the night he hoped to show Mira how committed he was to rebuilding their marriage. He moved to the kitchen and set the table, carefully placing 2 plates with matching napkins. In the center, he lit 2 candles. The aroma of steak in the oven suffused the air, reminding him of that cold, uneaten meal from their anniversary. This time, he was determined to make it right. He glanced at the clock. Mira would be back soon. He double-checked the flowers in the vase. White lilies, her favorite. Then he opened the small notebook he had been writing in every evening. Each night, he'd recorded a memory, a promise, or a simple note about what he appreciated in her. He wanted Mira to see tangible evidence of his efforts, not just vague statements. When Mira's key finally turned in the lock, Julian felt his heart rate spike. She walked in, visibly tired from work, her hair slightly disheveled. Then she froze, eyes widening at the sight of the candlelit table. A swirl of conflicting emotions crossed her face: surprise, wariness, a glimmer of hope. "Welcome home," Julian said quietly, stepping forward. I made dinner." She set down her purse, gaze shifting between him and the table. "Steak?" she asked, voice tinged with cautious recognition. "It's been a while." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah. I remembered how you like it with rosemary." She said nothing, but he could sense the walls around her heart wavering. They sat down. For the first few minutes, silence reigned, punctuated only by the sounds of utensils scraping plates. Julian's mind raced with what to say, how to break the tension. He noticed the small notebook on the table, placed near Mira's plate. Finally, she set down her fork. "Thank you for this," she said, voice soft. "I know you've been making an effort, coming home earlier, asking about my day. It means a lot." Relief washed over him. "I've missed this," he confessed, gesturing at the table. "Just sharing a meal with you, talking." A faint smile curved her lips. "So have I." The sincerity in her eyes was like a lifeline, urging him to keep going. When they finished eating, Julian reached for the notebook, handing it to her. "I've written something every night," he explained. "I wanted to show you that I'm serious about changing. That I'm trying to love you loud again." She hesitated before flipping open the cover. Her gaze moved over the pages, absorbing his daily entries. Some were just small moments. "Remember how you laughed at that silly sitcom last night? I loved seeing your smile." Others were more heartfelt. "Today, I realized I don't say thank you enough for all you do." Tears glistened in her eyes. She closed the notebook gently, pressing it to her chest. "Julian," she began, voice trembling with emotion. "I can see how hard you're trying. I won't pretend we're magically okay, but this is a good start." He nodded, throat tight. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make you feel heard and cherished." She reached across the table, her hand brushing over his. They shared a fragile, hopeful moment of contact. After dinner, they moved to the living room. The scent of lilies still hung in the air, a quiet reminder of why they were fighting to stay together. Mira settled onto the couch, her posture less guarded than before. "Evan suggested we do couples therapy if we want to rebuild," she said softly. "Would you consider that?" Without hesitation, Julian nodded. "Yes, absolutely. I want to understand what you've been going through. And I want to learn how to be better at communicating." A shaky exhale escaped her lips. She leaned back as though letting go of a deep weight. "Then we can schedule a session," she agreed. "It might feel uncomfortable at first, but it could help us face our issues head-on." Julian's heart felt lighter than it had in months. "I'll be there," he promised. They spent the next hour in a heartfelt conversation, tentative, vulnerable, but genuine. Mira shared how lost she felt when he forgot their anniversary, how each moment of neglect chipped away at her sense of worth. Julian admitted to burying himself in work to avoid facing their growing problems, never realizing how damaging his distance was. At the end of the evening, Mira picked up the small notebook one last time. Her gaze flicked to him, gratitude mingled with lingering caution. "Thank you," she said, voice cracking. "For noticing. For trying." He took her hands in his. "I'm just so sorry it took me this long. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." They stood, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Julian wrapped his arms around Mira in a genuine embrace. She melted into him, the tension in her body releasing, if only for that moment. Quietly, she whispered, "I want to believe we can make it." He pressed his forehead against hers, breathing in her warmth. "We can. One day at a time." In the flickering glow of the candles, they stood united, two broken parts of a marriage finally daring to heal. And as they held each other, the house no longer felt hollow. It felt like a home with a second chance, where communication replaced silence, and hope replaced fear. "When communication dies, love fades," Mira said softly, recalling something she had once written. Julian nodded, holding her tighter as he vowed never to let that happen again. The end. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.